Hello and welcome to this week's recruitment discussion with Jump. And this week we're going to look at bottlenecks in your sales processes. Are you getting your strategy to generate more significant ROI? And I think we don't talk enough about, or we don't talk enough in recruitment about process management or process improvement, or should I say, we say a lot about moaning about our processes, our systems, and then it sort of sits with our consultants and it becomes white noise, and then we seem to sort of disappear and do nothing about it. So this week we're going to talk about bottlenecks, process improvement, and how we can do that. And if you start to think about the data that we start to pull from some of these sort of things, only 1% of firms worldwide in a survey have their business process sufficiently under control to realize the financial benefits of digital transformation initiatives. 54% of customers have a higher expectation of customer service today than they did a year ago. 73% of companies on average customer experience is that they are more profitable than their competitors if they have a better customer experience. The average office worker spends 2 hours, 53 minutes a day working. So that's out of 8 hours, okay? Executives spend 16 hours a week on administration that could be automated. Employees spend 1.8 hours, that's 9.3 hours a week, searching and gathering information that's on their systems, but they can't find it. Average employee spends 4.1 hours a day checking their inbox. Wow. Bad data.
How many?
4.1 hours. Bad data eats up 20 to 30% of operational expenses. On average, 40% of leads are invalid, incomplete, or duplicated and never followed up. 90% of all spreadsheets have an error in them. Wow.
Mostly they're yours, aren't they?
Yeah, correct. Businesses waste between 32 and 41% of their software budget on features that they never use but would add benefit to their business. Out of 20 companies, I don't know which these 20 companies were surveyed, 50% of them or 55% of them said by improving their business management processes, they had an increase of $100,000 to $500,000 in that year. 6% of jobs or 1/3 of tasks require an employee to be automated or could be automated. And according to Gartner, the use of business process management frameworks in process increases the productivity of the business by 70%. And the last one, which is the most important one, at least 40% of all businesses, according to Cisco, will die in the next 10 years if they don't figure out how to change their entire company operational systems from a technical point of view and accommodate new technologies. So quite gloomy when you start to think about it like that, how much ones we're waiting when we sort of look at our process and what's going on with our processes from there. So this week I'm joined by Dave and Paul. So hopefully we'll make it a little bit more a cheery place to be. So let's kick in with our first question, which is always an interesting one. In your opinion, what are the hardest bottlenecks to cure? And that's bottlenecks, for examples, that could be your sales process, your CRM, or your payment processes. Or is it people and their willingness not to commit to those processes?
Well, there's a question. Actually, when I thought you were talking about bottlenecks, and I thought in advance about this, I thought we were talking about the Goon Show, but that was actually Blue Bottle, wasn't it? It's not bottlenecks. I got that wrong. So it's ruined my script now. I don't know what to talk about. I think that I think bottlenecks regarding process is a very important point. You know, the industry that we inhabit has always been one where we've given people a tremendous amount of freedom to express themselves, to develop their own personalities, to develop relationships with clients, candidates. And I think we've all worked in those environments, continue to work in those environments. It makes the job very engaging. We're not great generally as an industry in developing processes, and because people tend to think of it, particularly consultants, when we use that word, as admin. And they like admin. Don't want to be tied down to admin processes. The reality is that when you analyze the most successful organizations in the world, the organizations that we admire, I mean, you can look at Apple and various others, what you'll find when you deal with them is that things work with very, very tight embedded processes. People work certainly in a way where they can engage their personalities and they have a level of autonomy and freedom, but there's underneath and underpinning everything they do are processes. Things get done in an automatic fashion. We also live in a world today where, of course, there's an awful lot of software and AI available, not only in our industry, but generic AI and software that we can engage. It seems to me that the most successful recruitment companies, let alone businesses outside of our industry sector, have embedded processes that enable them to work in a way and a fashion that's standardized, that, if you like, is disciplined and provides outstanding customer and, in our case, candidate care. And I don't think it's about people. I don't think it's about people's attitude towards processes or their lack of ability. I think it's entirely about the methods in which we go about establishing these processes and getting people to recognize the benefits of things happening automatically. So I think it's a very deep subject, this one. Funny enough, I spent the whole of yesterday morning talking about embedded processes to a client, and we came up with probably, or too many, I would suggest, 12 very important action points off the back of this discussion, where we know that we can improve our methodology and provide better quality service to our clients and candidates.
So I think it's an interesting point there, that Paul, you mentioned clients and candidates. And I think the biggest thing that we seem to forgetting, the people that run these processes are consultants. And it's them, I think, that we need to sort of say, how do we remove the bottleneck from their processes to enable people to then become quicker, faster at the job and provide a better service to our end clients and candidates. And I think we've started to concentrate on our consultants first. We'd get a far better output on some of the processes that we do. Dave?
Yeah, I think the biggest bottleneck is consistency. So if you're running a business and you've got leaders in your business, it's what do they measure? When do they measure it? How do they measure it? And is everybody measuring the same thing at the same time? And the answer across most businesses is not everybody measures the same thing in the same way at the same time. And that's the bottleneck. So for me, the biggest bottleneck is consistency. I was with somebody yesterday who's just joined a new company. They asked them 5 or 6 questions about how they measure CV output, how they're measuring CVs that are sent on spec, how they measure the return on that, all of that sort of stuff. And the 3 different divisional managers that are going to end up reporting to this person all had a different answer. And yet, this is a very successful company, growing 30% year on year. But there isn't one consistent way of measuring everything. So for me, the bottleneck is consistency. And we'll come on to this, but some companies measure way too much and some companies not enough.
It's interesting. So let's move then. So if we look at, say, the 2 years that Jump's been running, or should I say the 25 years plus that we've been advising, or the 150 years that we've actually been in recruitment, that's 140 for that's 140 for Paul alone.
Yeah. I knew you were going to say that. I was waiting for that. Yeah.
So what's the number one bottleneck that you see then? What's a genuine number one bottleneck? And if we could then put a little question on the end of that, if you could put a cost on curing that process, what would that be? So what would you say is the number one bottleneck?
Okay, so I'll kick this off. I think that we, and I'm not, this is a generic statement, so certainly not aimed or targeted at anybody I know or work with, but I think as an industry, we're not great at truly understanding what our clients and candidates feel about the quality of our service. We spend an inordinate amount of time sitting in rooms talking about how we're going to improve our service. And many of those conversations are extremely positive and we often have great outcomes. But we don't spend anywhere near as much time externally talking to our clients and customers, even our candidates, about their expectations of our service and their impression of our service. We sometimes send out brilliant surveys and we get interesting information back. And that is extremely useful to do. But it again has to be followed up with face-to-face or at least voice-to-voice conversations to establish what people think of us. So to me, the bottleneck, if you are looking for a specific that I would consider to be maybe the most important thing, is this point that our communication externally with the people that spend money with us, the people that support our businesses, and people that come to us looking for work is not, and I am being generic here, but in many instances, not as tight or as close as it should be. And if we're going to provide world-class service, and I know that's a cliche, but if we're going to try to establish better quality service than our competitors or better quality service than we provided last year, then you can only find that out by speaking directly to people and then listening very carefully to what they have to say. And then it's about minor adjustments. Generally, you're not looking to revolutionize the things you do, but you are looking, I think, always at the detail. How do you improve by this percent or X percent to improve the quality of what you've done? And you'll only get the answers when you get the information from the people that utilize your service. That, to me, if you're looking at the most important thing, is where it's at. It's what do the people that use our services genuinely think about the quality of our service?
Dave?
And for me, it's who wants the information and what are they going to do with it? Because often I'll be on a site with a client, and they're all measuring so many different things because it's part of the board pack, or it's what they used to do at a previous company, or it's because they think that that's what they can really unearth a gem and get processes more refined. But actually, when you say, well, what are you doing that for, and who's going to own it, and who wants that information, often it's just, well, that's what we've always done. I worked with a new company last week, and the amount of data that was going into their board pack was taking forever to collate the data, pull it all together, because that was the board pack. Well, actually, if they concentrated on 3 or 4 more simple things, to your point, Paul, that could be customer service, customer experience, client relationships, whatever you want to call it, they would be a better measure. How they get there then, they may have to measure less, but they can have a greater impact.
It's interesting when you think about what's the biggest bottleneck. And when I sort of thought about the question there, in truth, I sort of looked at, if you want to streamline your business processes, the biggest thing that you need to do is then claw back time. And so to me, time is the biggest bottleneck that we've got. So you need to then focus on what you do best. And so if you look at the things that you do best, then what systems enable those processes? And then you look at how you can improve those processes. So I always think about, everyone says, I haven't got enough time to do this. So how do we then create time? So I think the best time to increase is what we do best, because that makes us more money. So to me, if we start to address those things, and to me, then you start to look at those bottlenecks and we look at where they start. So the biggest bottleneck then I start to see is the internal recruitment process, and then the onboarding, and then the training. Because when you start to look about your client engagement and your candidate engagement, if your consultants aren't good enough to engage with your clients, and as we said there, 4 hours a day looking at emails, what it sort of says is that they're not really engaged in saving time. So I engaged with a client, in the Midlands during lockdown, and we were addressing what they needed to improve. And so we looked at increasing their retention rate of consultants. So we changed how they recruit, we changed how they onboarded, and that's increased their retention rate by 15%. But it's also dropped the speed of how quickly these people become profitable to the business. And they're now, within 6 weeks, they're starting to add value to the business, where it was 12 weeks before that, and they've doubled their net profit. So we start to think about what people do best is what I would start to look at. And I think the biggest thing that people complain about is time. So if we can then start to look at the bottlenecks that time, that's not created time, look at the best things we do, then add that. And I think that's where we go. So the question then with the flip side to this is, for both of you have mentioned, well, all 3 of us have mentioned, we've been at clients and these bottlenecks are occurring. So why do business owners become blind to the bottleneck? And how can we, cure this blindness?
Firstly, Howard, I think your point about time is extremely valid. And, just to pick that point up, and I completely agree with you, it's not about as a leader or as a manager thinking, you're going to find yourself another day or two to do certain things. This is about small incremental steps. Can you create another half an hour a day to do certain things, which of course over the course of a month comes into some reasonable period of time. And you're absolutely right, analyzing where time is wasted, and valuing your time to the extent as a manager and leader that you're doing things that benefit the business and not getting tied up in a lot of the minutiae. But I'm sort of going slightly off piste here. You asked the question about bottlenecks. How can this blindness be cured?
Well, before you go onto that, Paul, so Hillary's on this webinar today, and she was on the webinar. We did a webinar for the World Staffing Summit about this time last year, I think it was, and she was talking about how her temp business, which is a high revenue part of her business or part of what they do best, when they changed their CRM to a new CRM, it gave their temp consultants 8 hours each per week, I think was the stat she rolled out on that comment, back into the business. Wow, 8 hours. If you could imagine giving your consultants an extra 8 hours to do something more client facing or candidate facing, how much more productivity would you get from those people? So no,
it's a great point.
Just to cut in. So why are owners blind then, and why don't they? How do we cure the blindness?
By the way, when you said summit, are you saying summit or summit, which is what you often say?
I'm from the north, mate. It's summit.
I thought it'd be summit. No, I think this point that you raise here about why do owners become blind? I don't think it's blindness. It's really that cliche that we often talk about Einstein's theory of insanity: keep doing the things you've always done and expect different results. I think we are, all of us, guilty of falling into those traps. I don't think it's about blindness. I think it's about just constantly trying to do the things we've always done before, and just hoping and praying that they'll be at least as effective, if not more effective, than the previous year. When the reality, of course, is that in time, whatever we've been doing, no matter how well we've been doing it, things deteriorate. They don't get better. They tend to worsen. You have to constantly analyze every element of your processes to establish whether they are as effective as last year, or indeed they're beginning to diminish in their effectiveness. And so it's a constant sense of analysis, not to the point of paralysis, but it is taking that assumption, I think reasonable assumption, that with the world changing and things moving, and clients, as I said a moment ago, expecting, and indeed candidates, more from us or different things from us, there is never a point at which you can lean on your laurels and say, well, everything we do works perfectly, there's no need to change it. It is about making minor changes, alterations. And as I said earlier, I think that's entirely down to listening. I didn't say this, but it's listening to your clients and candidates. And what I should have said as well is listening to the people that serve your clients and candidates. Who are those people? Your candidate, your consultants, the people, your managers, your leaders. What is it they're telling you as a leader? And I think listening to them and making those adjustments helps your business to develop and improve and move forward instead of standing still. So this point about blindness, I don't think it's blindness. I think it's more about inertia. Sometimes it's about just kind of feeling everything's okay, no need to change this, no need to change that. When, of course, the absolute reality is we have to constantly change, even if the change isn't necessarily revolutionary. It's minor amendments, minor alterations that are aligned with what people need from us. And our audiences, as I've just, I think, correctly said, are in three directions. That's our people, who are probably the most important audience, and those are our clients and, of course, candidates. So don't know if that answers your question, but for me, it's about this constant feeling that we have to move forward, we have to change, we have to amend, we have to alter.
Dave?
Often we change things in our systems and our processes in our business because somebody from outside our business comes up with a new solution that will change our world. We've all met software companies. We could go around the rec stands, Rec Expo, and there will be 100 different software companies that, if we adopted them all, will change our business for the better. Yeah, because that's why they exist. And some of those things work and some of them don't. But actually, as owners, if we start from what is our candidate experience and what is our client's experience, and how do we measure that? Is there anything out there that can help us do better at what we do? Then adopt that. Otherwise, actually stick to your knitting and stay with what you've got. And just gradually, as different things come along, You can test them, see if they make your customer experience or candidate experience better. Then if they work, then that's fine. But sometimes companies, I think, are guilty of the next new thing. What's out there, the next new thing, and they spend the money and implement it. But actually, it doesn't change the customer experience and it doesn't change the client experience.
But,
They're the two things that will drive our success. If we place more people into jobs and we have more clients that we then retain, that's success.
Dave, just to pick up your point there, I mean, how many times over the years have we visited customers, clients, and they've said to us, our CRM system is, what? And my attitude nowadays is that, generally speaking, to a greater or lesser extent, to pick up your point, CRM systems all do a decent or reasonably decent, or sometimes an outstanding job. The problem isn't the CRM, it's the attitude of people to using the CRMs correctly, just to pick up the point. So, yes, you can buy the Rolls Royce of CRMs, you can go and buy the Rolls Royce of whatever other software might be sitting inside an expo hall. But if your people aren't engaged and aren't prepared to use them correctly, you're wasting your money.
Yeah. And to Howard's point earlier, Paul, in the stats, he said, 40% of the software systems that we have aren't used, and yet they have solutions that we're not even aware that they
Correct.
They can be used, because we latch onto the things that we want it to do, not realizing there are other things it can do.
Correct.
So I think sort of pushing on to that point then, Paul, because CRM is a big one that people think, and it causes a blindness to that bottleneck. And I think this is because the consultants start to moan. That moan to the manager and the owners becomes a little bit of white noise, and that white noise, and then the desire to actually do something about that becomes a little bit, waning, but it becomes almost overwhelming, I think, for some managers to think, or some owners to think, I've got to change technology, I've got to do something, I've got to change my people management, etc. And they're all thinking that's a lot of short-term pain. And is there any long-term gain? And I think you're right in what you're saying, is that the fact that we don't really embrace the technology that we've got, we don't embrace the products that we've got, we don't embrace the procedures that we've got, and then look at how we can change those. And no one seems to like change. And we know that change management is one of the hardest jobs out there. And that's the problem, is that we're afraid, I think. So we do become, whether you want to call it blindness or deafness, to the actual problems that we've got. And it just becomes simple white noise. And I think we've got to listen, as you said there, Paul, to our consultants more. As Dave was saying, we've got to listen to our clients more and our candidates more to actually see where we've got. And I think that goes back to then the point I made before about look at what you're best at, and what can you free time up from there. And if you can speed things up in that process, you'll make more money that you can invest in other areas of the business to remove that. But it needs everybody to be aligned on that, and everyone understanding that if you're going to change a CRM, why are you changing it? I've got a client who's not changing his CRM because he went back and threatened to change this. They've come back and offered him more training, more understanding, and he suddenly found that the CRM can do 10, 15, 20 things that he didn't realize it could do, that is massively improving his business, because they'd never actually invested the time to do that, because everyone was moaning it's a poor CRM rather than actually investing time. So I think the moaning is the biggest sort of thing that creates the blindness or the deafness, because it's so prevalent from our consultants, because our consultants sometimes don't want change. And we want the leading, as you said, Paul, the Rolls Royce of systems, when sometimes you just want from get to A from B in a really good way. So you might not need a Rolls Royce. A Mercedes-Benz might be fine, or an Audi might be fine, or a Ford might be fine, or a Skoda might be fine, depending on the type of business that you are.
There's going to be a long list now of every flipping car.
Yes, there are other cars available to those that are listening from there. So if we think about this, and this is the bit that that I sort of think about all the time when we think about process improvement, product improvement, and having the Rolls Royce of systems, we constantly discuss attrition. But if we look at attraction and attrition, which bottlenecks, if we remove, would increase retention and attraction?
I mean, that's a massive question. I think, let me start by trying to address that point. I think, firstly, we have to be aware of subconscious or conscious bias. And what I mean by that is that we have a preset attitude towards what kind of people are going to be successful in our industry. And you see it all the time, and I hear it a lot of the time. People want people with experience in recruitment. We've all heard that many, many times. And I know over the last couple of years, particularly, there's been a loosening of that attitude, that people are now very happy to take on, inverted commas, graduates, people that have no recruitment experience and so forth. But I think opening our minds to the people that could actually make a big difference in our organizations from a range of different experiences and qualifications and backgrounds would make a difference. And we, all of us, I think lots of people listening today could give great examples of outstanding recruitment professionals whose backgrounds prior to working in the industry were completely detached from what we would consider to be the normal experience and backgrounds of people that do well in our industry sector. And I think so it's about firstly opening our minds to backgrounds and experience. At the same time, being very aware of our behaviors and values, that are the values that we hold dear, making sure that people culturally fit our organizations. But if I can come back to this point, I think it's also very importantly about looking at our onboarding process. And as you said earlier, I think, Howard, learning and development, the training, the coaching, that's not just evident when we first bring people in, but ongoing throughout their entire careers, not just when they start, teaching them all of the basics, but also developing from a succession planning perspective, our future leaders, making sure we are guiding and counseling and developing and coaching them expertly, sometimes with internal assistance, sometimes external assistance, but that pathway that gives people that opportunity to stay and develop within your organization is vitally important. We often think of it purely when we talk to people about salaries and benefits, but that's a dead end. You're never going to be in the business of being able to guarantee that you can pay more or offer better benefits than any of your competitors. It's much more about career opportunities, development, making people feel valued and so forth. So for me, if you're looking at bottlenecks around attraction and attrition, it starts with mindset. It moves towards the kind of cultural fit that's important to us. We work with people that share our values and behaviors, and then it's absolutely about making people feel valued, and that I think has to be expressed in the way in which we consistently support and coach people throughout their careers.
Yeah, I think to add to Paul's point about mindset, I think that the biggest bottleneck in attraction and retention is attitude. And that's our attitude to hiring, our attitude to the people we meet. And it's getting the balance right between the speed of hiring the right person at the right time versus the development that they will need. And having that attitude of, right, can they do something kind of a little bit more out of the box if that's what the job requires. So I think it's looking at ourselves as well and thinking, well, so-and-so worked. I did an exercise with a company I worked for where they had 2 superstars and everybody else was okay. And okay is good. Okay is good. Lots of people doing okay is good. But we got them to try to work out what the DNA was of the superstars, and we put that into the questioning for hiring, because it turned out that those superstars actually did a few things a bit more differently. So we use that as the hiring process. And that meant that the next few people they hired are still there. So I think it's an attitudinal thing for us as leaders, or for the people who are doing the hiring.
I think it's interesting. So we're all talking the same thing. I think if you want to cure that bottleneck and increase your retention rates, then go back to your EVP. Look at what your employee value proposition is, and then look at what's not working. And how often in that, whether it's be written on your website or whether it's part of the interview process, we're going to provide great training. But you then, I'll use the CRM as a prime sort of viewpoint, is that you come in, you give them the day's training. That's like bringing in an elite athlete and say, right, let's do 1 day of training, and then say, right, we don't have to train anymore, but just rock up on Saturday and play. You don't have to train whatsoever. And yet you expect that person to perform at the greatest level every Saturday, but they're no longer training. So that performance starts to degrade constantly. So you've got to keep training and training and training to get your people up to speed. So even on your CRM, your recruitment processes, etc., these are the bottlenecks. I think that then once you've cured those bottlenecks, guess what? They'll then start to highlight bottlenecks in your process that you can then start to cure as well. And so all the way through, it's about that continual improvement. And that goes back to what you were talking about, Paul, about those marginal gains and gaining marginal gains. So you've got to start to think about, bringing the right people into your business and then delivering on your EVP to retain those business. So as how Longstaff's brought, behavioral assessments and job role assessments, etc., become more prevalent because you then find the right behaviors. And we talked last week about recruit on value, recruit on will, and then recruit on skills. Because if they've got the value and the will to do the job, the skills we can train. But I can't train somebody to have the will and drive and determination to do the job. But how many people sit here and complain about they start at 9 o'clock and they finish at 5 o'clock? They don't want to do that extra hours. But that's something that we should be able to identify if we have the right recruitment process in the first place. So I think we've got to go right back to our initial bottlenecks and start to cure those first, because they will help then identify other ones and start to increase revenue very quickly.
Howard, just another point worth making about this point of coaching, and I think it's an important one, and that is people learn in different ways. So yes, I mean, there's a place for classroom training, if I can use that old adage, and there's a place for one-to-one coaching, mentoring, but it's, I think, being close enough to each individual in your organization to understand how they best what the methods they best react to in terms of learning and development. I know how I, for example, prefer to learn, but my learning curve, my attitude towards development is not necessarily the same as yours, Howard, or Dave's. So I think it's being understanding how people want to learn, how we get the best out of them, and that is about being tight to your people, tight enough to understand how to get the best from them, and importantly to understand what their personal drivers are, and indeed their restrainers, what's holding them back. If you're going to put together a quality L&D program, in my opinion, yes, there's some things and there are things clearly that we need to do as a group, as a team, but also I think it's being tight and close enough to individuals in your business to understand how they should benefit personally. And that takes a bit of time and effort and energy. And this point about time is important, Howard. You said earlier about managing time correctly. Well, if you can create a bit of extra time for yourself every week, then what better way than to get closer to the people around you that are so important to your organization?
So if we then change that and said, what method would you implement to firstly identify the bottleneck and then cure them?
I've kind of answered my own question, haven't I? I think I've done it already. I think the methods it's getting that time, and you said it very well, Howard, to analyze what's going on in your business. There's all these, we've talked a lot about the 7 effective behaviors and all those things that I think are brilliant methods of becoming better managers and leaders. But it's also, I think, when you read those great management books, they all say pretty much the same thing. And that is, you need to step back as a manager and a leader from your business and start looking more outward, as it were, towards, and I said it earlier, what people want from you. That's your clients, your candidates, and it's certainly about your people. And I think buying time enables you to do that and gives you the opportunity to analyze what's working and what needs to be changed or amended and improved. So if we're going to look at methods to identify bottlenecks and then figure out how to improve them or cure them, to your point, and you make a great point, it's about creating time. So, the most valuable thing we all have is time, and wasting time in areas that we could delegate to other people around us, for example, or even stop doing certain things that are really not getting us anywhere. There's an old point about, is it going to improve our return on investment? If we spend time doing X, Y, and Z, is that going to make the car go faster? And I think that's a point that we've always got to be looking at. Are we using our time effectively? Could we use our time more effectively in other areas? And when you do that, or at least try to do that, you do find extra time, and that gives you that space and time to analyze what's working in your business and then figure out with people around you how you're going to improve those areas.
You know, perversely, the people that know where most of the bottlenecks are the consultants, because they're the ones that get frustrated at being asked to do certain stuff that they don't really know why they're being asked to do it. But it's some sort of measurement. It's some sort of, it goes into a report that they never see, that they're never involved with, that they never get shared. And yet they know that there's certain ways of individual clients that they work with or candidates, then the way that they behave, if they could do it that way, it would make it better. So for me, a very simple way of answering this question is just to have a conversation with the consultants. Obviously, not all of them are right all of the time, but it would also be wrong to assume that all the leaders and the managers are right all of the time. So it's good to have that conversation. It's good to have that dialogue, and also getting them involved in understanding what works and what doesn't, in process mapping it, if that's the right phrase, is a good thing, because you get more buy-in.
So I think it's interesting, isn't it? I go back to what I said right at the beginning, that you look at the processes that make you the most money first and foremost. That's the first thing that I would look at, and then look at how to cure them. But what I tend to see is that what people look at is they look at the surface rather than usually the end point. That's usually the end point is the surface, and you need to initiate a process that digs below and goes below that surface, so you can see what's actually working, what's not working, because you might find that the problems further down the line or further below the surface, and that's what you want to cure. So, you know, whether it be consultant or whether it be candidate or whether it be client, you know, it's about how do we create a better journey for all of them to go through the recruitment process that makes it quicker and faster. Okay, so people are usually happy when they reach the surface, but what I tend to see when you look at elite salespeople, you look at elite businesses, it's what floats on the surface that actually makes more money. And it's going that extra step to find that thing that floats on the surface, to start at the bottom, get to the surface, and then grow. And I think that's the bit that we start to look at. So I always think everyone's aiming for the surface, but we should aim beyond that surface, because people can float on the surface and you can grow things on the surface, you know, but we never go below to see whether it's fit enough to actually get there in the first place. You know, so we've got to start to dig underneath to see what's right in the first place, cure those blocks, that will then cure the surface. Then we can start to put things that float on top of the surface. And to me, that's where I'd look at identifying the bottlenecks constantly in that way. If we identified the bottlenecks to stay competitive and ahead of our competition with regards to process, what would you say is the number one rule that you'd put in place in your business in order to stay competitive?
I think it begins with mindset. I think as leaders, we need to remain humble, express humility. I think it's about listening and learning. I mean, there's never a point where you can genuinely say, I know it all. We've got this cracked. It's all working perfectly. It can't be improved. We're the best, and all that other nonsense. You've simply got to constantly be aware of areas that can be improved, and you do that by asking questions of your people, of your audience, and understanding perspective. Doesn't necessarily mean you agree with people's perspectives or their perceptions, but it's important to listen. And if you're doing that and you're stepping back from a situation and you're managing your emotions, you're using the analytical element of your brain, and you're asking around you for assistance and support, then there's a great chance that you can consistently improve the things you do for yourself, for your business, for the people around you, and so forth. It starts with humility. It starts with understanding that nothing is ever perfect, that there are always areas we can improve. And even if we ever get even remotely close to whatever perfection looks like, at the moment you're at the stage, everything's changing at a rapid rate around you, and you find yourself falling behind whatever advancements are being made. It's one of the compelling things we love about our business, that nothing ever stays the same for very long. And so I think it starts with that. It's really about listening and learning, and we are surrounded by people that are quite prepared to give us their views and their perspectives, some of which are entirely valid. Well, in fact, they're all valid, whether you agree with them or not. And it's about taking that on board. And I said right at the beginning, please, we need to be talking to our clients all of the time, not once a year, not every 6 months, but we should be in front of our customers, and I mean physically in front of our customers at the maximum period of 3 months. And with some of those clients regularly, much more regularly than that. And I'm afraid that does not happen to the extent that it should happen. We may be one of the worst industries in many respects in that sense, that we are not tight enough to the people that use our services to truly understand what they think of us and what they want from us going forward. And it's the one thing, in my opinion, that really needs improvement.
I could use my my rule, Paul, which is 6 words: measure what matters, ditch the rest. I find a lot of the smaller companies that I'm working with, and by smaller I mean less than 15 people, they're trying to be big companies in what they're measuring. In other words, they're measuring everything. And actually, I just encourage them to measure what really matters, what really brings profit to the bottom line to scale your business. Measure that, don't measure anything else.
I think it's an interesting call on all of it. And I think, when I say to stay competitive and ahead of our competition with regards to process, what's number one you put in place, I would start to think about having a happy, collaborative workforce. Because if you have a happy, collaborative workforce, they'll perform far better for you than any other type of workforce. And so that means, how do you keep those candidates as consultants happy and collaborative? And that's by listening to what they're saying, putting ongoing improvement into your processes. So when they're suggesting improvements, it's not just white noise to you as the manager, it's something you should be considering, looking to improve, looking to develop. And that, to me, is how you stay competitive. You start to really work on your people, because what we said at the beginning of lockdown was, obviously, if you look after your people look after your candidates and your clients, and your candidates and clients will then in turn look after you as the manager. So you're the last person on the rung to be looked after, but you should be really looking after your people. And so how you look after them is really important. So here's a question then to finish today's session off. How often and how much time and human capital would you put into getting your processes to be easier, faster, and more cost effective?
Oh, that's, well, how often, how much time? It's daily. It's constant. It's not just something that annually, there's some kind of audit on processes. And when processes is a fairly big word anyway, but it's not just sort of an annual audit. It's a daily thing. It's a constant review of what works, what doesn't work. How do things improve? You said very well, Howard, it's about keeping people happy and motivated. It's also about making people understand the benefits of why you are insistent that certain things have to operate in a certain way. I said at the beginning that the best businesses in the world, the ones we all admire the most, have absolutely embedded processes. They're non-negotiable. Certain things happen in a certain way. Steps are taken. The language we use with clients, for example, things that are entered onto systems, and so on. These things are all absolutely strongly embedded, and world-class businesses work in that fashion. But they also they will not accept that whatever they're doing is good forever. They will constantly looking and reviewing how they're going to improve the service to their customers. And this is the sort of the key point. If the way we make decisions is based upon placing our clients and candidates, and indeed our people, in the complete center of our universe, what's right for them? How do we improve their journey, their experience of working with us? If that is our single most important focus, and you start from looking at it from their perspective, standing in their shoes, thinking about what works for them and how things could be better for them, then you've got a great chance of making great decisions that will benefit your business and ultimately your profitability. It's not about what's convenient for us and what's good for us and how we feel. It's about placing those populations, if you like, in the middle of our thinking. What works for them? How do we improve their experiences? And if you start from that position and work backwards from that point, you've got a great chance of creating a world-class business.
It's interesting, Howard, isn't it? Because you started with a stat that said something like 2.53 hours out of 8 hours are spent working. I don't think that's true for recruitment, but if that was true, that means that only a third of the day is spent working. I don't know a recruitment company where 2/3 of the day isn't spent working on recruitment, but maybe it's there's something in the day where things could just be a little bit better to make our employees happier, therefore more productive. So one of the things we could look at is what will make the workforce just that little bit happier. Whatever percentage, I don't know what percentage it would be, but according to that one stat, if you just take that one stat out, 2/3 of the day people aren't doing much. I don't get that in recruitment, but maybe as leaders we can look at it and go, what would make our employees just that little bit happier to give a little bit more effort and then enjoy it more. Whatever that is, then focus on that.
It's interesting when we look at that, but then they say the average employee spends 4.1 hours a day checking their inbox.
Yeah.
So you put the 2 hours that you're working, or nearly 3 hours that you're working, you put your 4 hours you're checking your inbox, and now all of a sudden you're nigh on 7 hours. Yeah, there's not a lot of time to do anything else.
Sometimes my finger gets stuck in the Rolodex, and then I what's going on?
That's
I
funny.
have to go to my abacus to find out whether I'm on time or not.
So I think this is just
a sundial. Yeah.
I think this, as a manager's and an owner's commitment, is an everyday ongoing process. And I also think that as a management and a commitment, it should be something that is delegated also down to the workforce to get them to be part of it, so we can start to hear and listen and implement some of the things that they're talking about, rather than being, well, we don't want to do that, because sometimes they may be coming out with ideas that actually, because they're on the shop floor, work. And I think that's the thing that we should be thinking for. So we should invest as much time as we can, as much human capital as we can into the processes to try ease the processes, make them faster, make them more efficient for the business. Because if we can do that, that creates more time that we can spend with our clients and with our candidates and with our consultants, training them to develop better processes at the end to increase our return on revenue. And I think, to me, everything that we've talked about today is all about actually investing your time in looking at how you can create more time for others. And I think once we do that, then you start to get a better productive workforce, which creates a happier workforce, etc. Recruit the right people into that, and just rinse and repeat and keep moving it on and moving it forward. So I think there's lots of things that we can do, but because we are too busy doing things that might not actually be productive for the business, then we tend to forget and lose the essence of these things that could actually make more profit for the business if we actually spent some time and did that. So that's it, guys, for today. Next week, we're going to touch on the point, though, which is, are your retention strategies working, and have you stopped the revolving door? I think this year, more than anything, is the recruitment's going to be a really big year, whether people think we're going in recession or out recession. But the thing that is going to maintain your business this year is the retention of your staff. And so next week, we're going to have a real deep dive into the retention strategies and are they working to stop that revolving door. Dave, Paul, thanks very much for your input. Guys, thank you very much for attending. Hilary, thanks very much for the memory on there of your 8 hours savings, because it was a great point to bring out. Okay, and we look forward to seeing you all again next week.
See you, everybody. Take care.
Have a good week, everyone. Thank you.